I'm sitting at the kitchen table, the faint hum of the heater filling the silence as I stare into my cup of coffee. Winter mornings are always quiet, but this January feels especially still. My son, Daniel, is upstairs getting ready for work. At 25, he's everything a mother could hope for. Kind, driven, and thoughtful. But most importantly, he's my rock. After the heartbreak of my divorce 5 years ago, Daniel has been the one steady presence in my life. The memories of those first months after my husband's betrayal are a blur. Lonely nights, countless tears, and the suffocating weight of failure. Daniel was just 20 then, barely a man but wise beyond his years. He had no choice but to step up. And he did. He became my shoulder to lean on, my reason to keep moving forward. I hear his footsteps on the stairs, steady and purposeful. "Morning, Mom," he says, stepping into the kitchen. He's already dressed in his crisp white coat, the one he wears to the clinic. Being a gynecologist isn't an easy job, but Daniel seems to thrive in the challenges it brings. His patients adore him and his colleagues respect him. I can't help but beam with pride every time he tells me about his work. "Morning," I reply, setting a plate of toast and eggs in front of him. "Big day today." He nods, taking a bite of his breakfast. Couple of surgeries and I have a patient who's... well, she's nervous. First pregnancy. His voice is calm, soothing even, and I wonder how many women have found comfort in his steady presence. "You'll do great as always," I say, ruffling his hair the way I used to when he was a boy. He laughs, swatting my hand away playfully. Despite the man he's become, there are still moments when I catch a glimpse of the little boy who used to run around the house with boundless energy. As he leaves for work, the house feels empty again. I try to busy myself. Laundry, emails, anything to keep my mind occupied. But by mid-afternoon, the quiet becomes oppressive. I find myself staring out the window, watching the snow fall in delicate patterns. It's moments like these that remind me how much my life has changed. The lively home I once knew is gone, replaced by this stillness. When Daniel returns in the evening, his cheeks pink from the cold, he brings with him the warmth I've been missing all day. We settle into our routine. Dinner, a glass of wine for me, and stories about his day. He talks about his patients, his co-workers, the little victories and challenges of his work. It's clear he loves what he does, and his passion is infectious. "You know," he says suddenly, setting down his fork, "you don't have to do everything alone, Mom." I blink, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "You've been so strong since the divorce," he says, his eyes meeting mine. "But you don't always have to be. I'm here. Always." His words hit me harder than I expect, and for a moment I'm speechless. There's a sincerity in his voice that cuts through the walls I've built around myself. I nod, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Thank you, Daniel. I don't know what I'd do without you." He smiles, and for a brief moment, the quiet house feels full again. Of love, of connection, of hope. Daniel offered to heat the bathhouse. The idea caught me off guard at first. A bathhouse. It had been years since I'd set foot in one. My husband had loved our weekly trips there. It had been a cherished family tradition. After the divorce, the thought of continuing without him had felt unbearable. But now, Daniel was looking at me with that steady, convincing gaze of his, the one that had a way of melting my resolve. "Come on, Mom," he said, leaning casually against the kitchen counter. "We could both use it. It's been a long week." His tone was easygoing, but there was a warmth in his smile that told me this was more than just a suggestion. It was his way of saying he wanted to spend time together, away from the routine of our lives. And truth be told, I wanted that too. "All right," I said, folding my arms. "But you're the one lighting the fire." Daniel grinned, a flash of boyish charm that never failed to make me smile. "Deal." The air was crisp and biting as we walked out to the small, cedar-scented bathhouse at the edge of our property. It had been dormant for years, but Daniel set to work like an expert, stacking logs in the stove and coaxing the flames to life. I watched him as he moved, his shoulders broad and his movements deliberate. It struck me how much he had grown, not just physically, but in his quiet confidence. "I can't believe you remember how to do all this," I said, leaning against the doorway. He glanced at me over his shoulder, a playful smirk tugging at his lips. "I learned from the best." The heat began to build, and soon the bathhouse was filled with a familiar aroma of warm wood and steam. I stepped inside, feeling the tension in my shoulders begin to melt away. Daniel was already seated on one of the wooden benches, a towel slung loosely around his waist. "You look strong, Mom," he said suddenly, his eyes appraising me. "Not a lot of women your age can pull off looking so fit." I laughed, the compliment catching me off guard. "Are you trying to say I'm old?" No, he said quickly, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "I'm saying you're impressive. Your muscles, your height. You've always carried yourself with so much strength." His words were sincere, and I found myself blushing under his gaze. "Well, thank you, Daniel. You're not so bad yourself, you know. All those hours at the clinic must be keeping you in shape." He chuckled, running a hand through his damp hair. "Guess so." As the heat settled into my skin, I felt a sense of calm that had eluded me for years. Daniel seemed just as relaxed, leaning back against the bench with a contented sigh. "You've been working so hard lately," I said, noting the slight tension in his posture. "Let me give you a massage. You've earned it." His eyebrows lifted in surprise, but then he smiled. "That sounds amazing. Thanks, Mom." I motioned for him to lie down on the bench, and he did so without hesitation. As I pressed my hands into his shoulders, I felt the tightness in his muscles begin to ease. His skin was warm under my fingertips, and I worked carefully, kneading the knots away with a steady rhythm. "This feels incredible," he murmured, his voice muffled against the wood. "You're a natural." I smiled, the simple act of caring for him bringing a surprising sense of closeness. "Just don't fall asleep on me." He laughed softly, turning his head to glance back at me. "I won't, I promise." When I finished, Daniel sat up and stretched, rolling his shoulders with a look of pure relief. "You're amazing," he said, his voice warm. Then, to my surprise, he leaned forward and kissed me on the cheek. "Thank you, Mom." The gesture was tender, affectionate, and it left me momentarily speechless. I smiled, brushing a damp strand of hair from my face. "Anything for you." We sat side by side in the quiet heat, the steam swirling around us like a cocoon. The air between us felt different, not awkward but charged with an unspoken understanding. Daniel reached for my hand, his grip firm yet gentle. "I'm glad we did this," he said softly. "It's been a long time since we just took a moment like this." I nodded, my chest tightening with emotion. "Me too." For the first time in years, the bathhouse didn't feel like a relic of a broken past. It felt like a new beginning, a space where Daniel and I could simply be together without the weight of the world pressing down on us. And as the steam enveloped us, I felt something shift, a quiet realization that this bond we shared was deeper, stronger than I had ever understood. The steam lingered, curling in soft ribbons around the wooden walls, as Daniel and I sat in the bathhouse, the silence between us warm and comforting. I felt more at peace than I had in years, the tension I hadn't realized I carried slowly dissolving under the heat. But there was something else, something unspoken that pulsed between us, subtle but impossible to ignore. Daniel broke the quiet, his voice soft but steady. "Mom," he began, glancing at me with an earnest expression, "when was the last time you had a routine gynecological exam?" The question caught me off guard. I turned to look at him, searching his face for any sign of humor, but there was none. He was serious, his concern evident in the slight furrow of his brow. "I think it's been about 10 years," I admitted, feeling a flush rise to my cheeks. "It's just not something I've thought about in a while." Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line, and he nodded slowly, his hands resting on his knees. "Mom, that's way too long," he said gently. "There are so many things that can go unnoticed without regular checkups. I don't want to scare you, but I've seen too many cases where early detection could have made all the difference." His words were calm, his tone steady, but I could see the worry in his eyes. It was the same look he gave me whenever I tried to downplay a headache or ignore a lingering cold. "I'll make an appointment," I promised, hoping to ease his concern. "Don't worry about me. You don't have to go anywhere else," he said, his gaze meeting mine. "Come to me. I'll do the exam myself. That way, I'll know everything is okay." The idea sent a jolt through me, not of fear, but of something I couldn't quite name. Daniel had always been protective of me, but this was different. The thought of sitting in his clinic, of being in such an intimate and vulnerable position with him, made my heart race. Yet, I couldn't deny the comfort his offer brought. I trusted him more than anyone else in the world. "Are you sure that's okay?" I asked hesitantly. I wouldn't want to make things awkward. Daniel smiled softly, his eyes kind. "You're my mom. There's no one more important to me. Your health is what matters." His words settled over me like a warm blanket, easing my apprehension. "Okay," I said finally. "If it'll give you peace of mind, I'll come to you." The following week, I found myself standing in Daniel's clinic, my hands twisting nervously in my lap. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air, a sharp contrast to the warmth of his voice as he greeted me. "You're here," he said with a reassuring smile, stepping out from behind his desk. He was dressed in his white coat, his name embroidered neatly over the pocket. In that moment, he wasn't just my son. He was a professional, confident and composed. "Of course," I replied, my voice lighter than I felt. "I said I'd come, didn't I?" He gestured for me to follow him into the exam room, his demeanor calm and steady. "You're in good hands, Mom," he said as he closed the door behind us. "I promise this won't take long." The room was quiet as I changed into the gown he provided, my thoughts racing. When I emerged, Daniel was waiting, his expression gentle but focused. He guided me through the process with the same care I imagined he gave all his patients, explaining each step and ensuring I felt at ease. His hands were steady and warm, his touch professional yet tender. "You're doing great," he said softly, his eyes meeting mine briefly. "Let me know if anything feels uncomfortable." I nodded, finding comfort in his calm presence. He was so careful, so meticulous, that any nervousness I'd felt began to melt away. Instead, I was struck by how deeply he cared, how every movement, every word, was infused with concern for my well-being. When the exam was over, Daniel helped me sit up, his gaze searching mine for any sign of discomfort. "Everything looks good," he said with a smile, relief evident in his voice. "But I'm glad you came in. It's important to stay on top of these things." "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Not just for this, but for everything. You always take care of me." His expression softened, and for a moment, the air between us felt charged with something unspoken. "You've always taken care of me, Mom," he said quietly. "It's only right that I do the same for you." That evening, back at home, I couldn't stop thinking about Daniel. The way he had looked at me during the exam, the way he spoke to me with such tenderness, it had stirred something inside me. My feelings for him, already deep, seemed to be shifting, growing into something I couldn't quite define. I knew Daniel was holding back too, his restraint evident in the careful way he interacted with me. He was always so composed, so thoughtful, as if he were afraid of crossing a line. And yet, there were moments, lingering glances, soft touches, that hinted at something more. As we sat together on the couch that night, the quiet hum of the television filling the space, I found myself leaning closer to him, drawn to his warmth. He noticed but didn't pull away. Instead, he shifted slightly, his arm brushing against mine. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, my heart pounding. Thanks to you." He smiled, his gaze holding mine for a beat too long. "I'm glad." The silence that followed was heavy but not uncomfortable, filled with a connection that seemed to grow stronger with each passing moment. I didn't know where this would lead, but for the first time in years, I felt truly seen, truly loved. The warmth of the evening and the soft hum of the television created a cocoon of comfort I hadn't felt in years. Daniel's presence beside me was steady and calming, like a lighthouse guiding me through the stormy waters of my thoughts. I hadn't intended to drift off, but the weight of the day, coupled with the soothing warmth of being close to him, was impossible to resist. At first, I barely registered the subtle shift in the air. His soft laugh, the gentle way he adjusted his arm so I could rest more comfortably against him. In the haze of sleep, I felt his hand brush lightly across my temple, a fleeting touch that sent a ripple of warmth through me even in my half-conscious state. The next thing I knew, I was weightless, cradled securely. Through the haze of sleep, I vaguely felt the gentle sway of his movements as he carried me. His chest was solid beneath my cheek, and the faint scent of his cologne mingled with the warmth of his skin. He was careful, so careful, as he laid me down in bed and adjusted the blanket over me. Even in my dreamy state, I could feel the tenderness in his touch, the quiet strength of his care. "Good night, Mom," he whispered, his voice soft and reassuring. I murmured a barely coherent response, already sinking deeper into sleep. The last thing I felt was the comforting touch of his hand as he adjusted the covers around my shoulders before the world faded to black. The scent of freshly brewed coffee stirred me from my slumber, and I blinked against the soft morning light streaming through the curtains. For a moment, I was disoriented, my mind still caught between the remnants of last night's dream and the reality of waking up. Then I saw him. Daniel stood by the bed, a tray in his hands laden with coffee, scrambled eggs, and toast. His grin was boyish, mischievous even, and it made me laugh despite my lingering sleepiness. "Good morning, sleepyhead," he teased, setting the tray down carefully on my lap. "You were out like a light last night. I had to carry you to bed." I flushed, my cheeks warming under his amused gaze. "I'm sorry," I said sheepishly, though his laugh made it clear there was no need to apologize. "Don't be," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You look so peaceful. I didn't have the heart to wake you." He nodded toward the tray. "Eat up. You've got a big day ahead." "What big day?" I asked, raising an eyebrow as I took a sip of the coffee. It was just the way I liked it, hot, strong, and with a splash of cream. "Well," he began, a playful glint in his eye, "you've got to keep up with me. I was thinking we could heat up the bathhouse again tonight. You seemed to enjoy it as much as I did." The mention of the bathhouse sent a wave of anticipation through me. Memories of the previous evening, the warmth, the soothing atmosphere, the sense of connection, rushed back in vivid detail. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but the thought of being there with him again, sharing that same close and comforting space, was enough to make my pulse quicken. "I'd love that," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "But only if you're doing the heavy lifting again." "Of course," he replied with a mock bow, his tone teasing. "You just sit back and let me take care of everything. That's what I'm here for." The rest of the day passed in a blur. I busied myself with chores and errands, but my mind kept drifting back to the evening ahead. I could still feel the weight of his presence from the night before, the calmness in his voice, and the care he had shown in carrying me to bed. By the time the sun began to set, I was practically counting the minutes. Daniel, true to his word, had already prepared the bathhouse. The faint scent of cedar smoke drifted through the crisp winter air as I approached, a small bundle of towels in my arms. He stood in the doorway, his frame silhouetted by the golden glow of the fire inside. "You're just in time," he said, flashing me that easy smile that always managed to make me feel both grounded and light-hearted. "It's nice and warm in there." The moment I stepped inside, I felt the same sense of calm I'd experienced the night before. The heat wrapped around me like an embrace, and I settled onto the wooden bench beside him, our shoulders brushing slightly. It was a small touch, but it carried a quiet reassurance. Daniel poured water over the stones, and the room filled with a fresh burst of steam. He leaned back, his arm resting casually along the bench behind me, and I found myself stealing glances at him, at the way his damp hair curled slightly at the ends, at the relaxed strength in his posture. "You seem quiet tonight," he said. his voice cutting through the gentle hiss of the steam. I smiled, shaking my head. Just thinking. About what? He asked, his tone curious but not pressing. I hesitated, searching for the right words. About how nice this is. How lucky I am to have you. His expression softened, and he turned to face me fully. You're not lucky, Mom, he said quietly. You deserve this. You deserve to be cared for, to feel supported. I'm just happy I can be here for you. The warmth of the bathhouse enveloped us like a comforting cocoon, the gentle hiss of steam filling the space. Daniel leaned back against the wooden bench. His posture relaxed but his eyes attentive. I could feel his gaze on me, steady and unspoken, as though he were waiting for the right moment to say something. So he began, his voice low but curious. How did it feel? At my clinic, did you like it? I paused, letting the question settle between us. His tone wasn't teasing or boastful. It was genuine. He truly wanted to know. I started searching for the right words. It was different. It's not exactly a normal situation, going to your own son for something like that. I glanced at him, my lips curving into a small smile. But you were so professional, Daniel. Gentle, kind. Exactly what I imagine your patients must see in you every day. His expression softened, his lips curving slightly upward. That means a lot to me, Mom, he said. I was worried it might feel too awkward for you. I shook my head. Honestly, felt safe with you. I knew I was in good hands. Daniel's smile widened, a warmth radiating from him that made the room feel even cozier. That's all I wanted, he said softly. You've done so much for me over the years. Feels good to give back, even in small ways like that. There was a pause as the steam curled around us, the quiet filling the space like an unspoken acknowledgement of how far we'd come. I can see why your patients trust you so much, I added. You have this way of making people feel at ease. I never doubted that you'd be great at what you do, but seeing it firsthand, it's different. It's special. He looked at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Gratitude maybe, or pride. I'm glad you felt that way, he said. I always want you to feel cared for, especially when it comes to your health. It's important to me. There was something in his tone, a quiet intensity, that made my chest tighten with emotion. I reached out instinctively, resting my hand lightly on his arm. You've always taken care of me, Daniel. Even when I didn't realize I needed it. I don't say it enough, but thank you. His hand covered mine briefly, the gesture as natural as breathing. You don't have to thank me, he said, his voice low but steady. I just want you to know I'll always be here for you. No matter what. The sincerity in his words touched me deeply, and for a moment all I could do was nod, my throat too tight to speak. As the evening stretched on, the conversation turned lighter, easier. Daniel teased me about how tense I'd been at the clinic, mimicking my nervous glances and fidgeting hands with exaggerated flair. I wasn't that bad. I protested, laughing as I nudged him playfully. You were, he said, grinning. I half expected you to bolt before we even got started. Well, I didn't, did I? I countered, a playful edge to my voice. No, he admitted, his smile softening. You trusted me. And that means more than I can say. The room fell quiet again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that held meaning, a shared understanding that didn't need words. As the fire crackled softly in the stove, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The connection between us had always been strong, but in recent weeks, it had deepened in ways I hadn't expected. Daniel's care, his steady presence, had become a constant in my life, and I found myself relying on him more than I realized. Ready for another round of steam? He asked, breaking the silence with a gentle smile. I nodded, pulling myself from my thoughts. Let's do it.